Growing up, I always thought my dad was one of the most straightforward people I knew. David, strong, warm, and somehow always steady. Even when life threw its punches, he held the pieces together with a calm I admired without fully understanding. We had this unspoken bond that never needed many words. Sunday mornings spent watching old movies, his gentle voice telling stories from his past. Those little moments made me feel safe, like nothing could break what we shared. Lately, though, something had shifted. I noticed the way he'd glance at his phone quickly whenever I entered the room, or how some nights he'd come home late, quieter than usual, his smile strained. It wasn't that I suspected anything bad at first. I told myself adults had stresses, that maybe work was wearing him down. Still, the change felt like a crack in the foundation I thought was solid. I wanted to ask, but every time I tried, the words stuck in my throat. I wasn't ready to believe something was wrong. My own life was just starting to unfold. College, friends, new experiences. And Mark, my best friend since childhood, was my anchor. Mark was different from my dad, but just as important to me. Whenever I felt lost or overwhelmed, he was there, quick with a joke or a listening ear. We talked about everything, from crushes to dreams about the future, but I never told him about the strange distance growing between me and Dad. How could I? I wasn't even sure what was happening. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. David was upstairs, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange mix of hope and anxiety. Maybe tonight he'd open up. I wanted to hear from him directly, to bridge this silence that had settled like fog between us. But then I heard the soft buzz of his phone in the other room, and a pang of doubt washed over me. The phone was usually left on the kitchen counter, face up. Tonight, it was tucked away in his jacket pocket. I told myself to let it go, to trust that whatever was going on, he'd tell me when he was ready. But the truth is, that night planted a seed of unease I couldn't shake. There was something hidden, something I wasn't meant to see just yet. And the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became inside my mind. The next morning felt heavy. I tried to focus on my classes, on the chatter around me, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Dad. I remembered the way he'd laughed a little too quickly when I asked about his night. There was a tiredness in his eyes that didn't belong to the usual kind of fatigue. It was as if he was carrying a secret too heavy to share. At dinner, I watched him carefully. He talked about work, about the usual routines, but there was a hesitance underneath the words, like he was holding something back. I wanted to reach out, to tell him it was okay, that I was here no matter what. But the words felt fragile, as if speaking them might shatter the delicate balance we had. Later, lying in my bed, I tried to make sense of the whirlwind inside me. Was it betrayal? Was it just a misunderstanding? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them clear or comforting. I knew that whatever the truth was, it would change everything. Not just my relationship with Dad, but how I saw the family I thought I understood. I closed my eyes, hoping for answers in the dark. But all I found was the echo of that night's silence, and the quiet fear that while I was sleeping, my life had already begun to unravel in ways I couldn't yet imagine. That night, sleep felt like a stranger. I tossed and turned, my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers for. When I finally drifted off, it was to the uneasy soundtrack of muffled voices downstairs. I woke suddenly, a tight knot forming in my chest. Something was off. Curiosity and dread pulled me from bed, urging me toward the stairs. I needed to know what was happening, couldn't ignore it anymore. The house was quiet except for whispers, coming from the living room. I crept down the steps, every creak underfoot amplified in the stillness. Peering around the corner, I saw two figures, one unmistakably Dad, the other a man I'd never met. They sat close, voices low but charged with an intimacy I hadn't expected. David's face softened as he looked at the man, whose name I'd later learn was Lucas. There was tenderness in their exchange, a closeness that stunned me. They spoke, quietly about plans and feelings, words filled with care and affection. It was more than a friendship. This was something deeper, something Dad had kept hidden from me all this time. My heart pounded. Shock and confusion flooded me at once. How could Dad keep this a secret? Why hadn't he trusted me enough to share this part of his life? I felt as though I'd been watching a movie where the ending was rewritten without warning. Yet, even as the hurt settled in, I caught glimpses of something else. Genuine love, vulnerability. A man unafraid to show his true self to someone who mattered. It complicated everything. The image of my dad I'd held for years shifted in an instant, blurring the lines between betrayal and understanding. I didn't want to intrude further, but the urge to listen overwhelmed me. I stayed frozen in place, torn between anger and empathy. They laughed softly, sharing stories that revealed a history I hadn't known existed. Lucas's voice was warm, reassuring, and David's eyes shone with something I'd never seen before: hope. When the conversation dwindled, Lucas reached out, brushing a hand over Dad's. It was a simple gesture, but to me it screamed of a bond that was both beautiful and forbidden in my mind. I slipped back upstairs, heart aching and head spinning. Back in my room, the silence was suffocating. I grabbed my phone and called Mark, needing to hear a familiar voice, someone to help make sense of this chaos. His calm tone was a lifeline, steady and grounding. "I don't know what to do," I confessed. "Dad, he's hiding something. Big. It's not just work stress, it's someone else. A man. And they're close, like really close." Mark was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's a lot, Ethan. But maybe it's not about hiding you out of fear or shame. Maybe he's scared you won't understand." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know if I understand. It feels like a betrayal, like my whole family's foundation cracked without warning." "Families are complicated," Mark said gently. "Maybe this is one of those things that will hurt before it heals. You should talk to him when you're ready. But don't shut him out completely." His words stuck with me. I wanted to believe that, wanted to find a way through this without losing my dad or the life I knew. But fear tangled with hope in a mess I wasn't ready to unravel yet. The next day, the house felt different. The usual rhythms, Dad's coffee brewing in the morning, the rustle of newspapers, carried a strange weight. Every glance exchanged was loaded with questions left unspoken. I caught Dad staring at me once, a flicker of guilt passing across his face, but he quickly looked away. I wondered if he knew I'd heard, if he suspected I was piecing together his secret. The thought unsettled me more than the secret itself. As the day wore on, I wrestled with a storm of emotions. Part of me wanted to confront him, demand answers, force honesty. Another part begged for time, to process, to accept, to understand. I realized this wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal. It was about identity, fear, and the courage it took for my dad to live a truth he'd hidden for so long. That night, I found myself staring out the window, the city lights blurred like my thoughts. I felt caught between two worlds, the son who loved his father unconditionally, and the outsider who didn't know what to make of this secret love. I knew things couldn't go back to how they were before. The innocence of my assumptions had shattered. But somewhere beneath the confusion, a new question stirred. Could love, in all its messy forms, survive the darkest truths? I wasn't sure yet, but I knew I had to find out. The next morning, I knew the moment had come. The weight of silence was unbearable, and I couldn't carry this secret alone any longer. I found Dad in the kitchen, pouring coffee with his usual calm, but the lines on his face told me he hadn't slept much either. My heart pounded as I stepped forward, voice shaking but steady. "Dad, we need to talk." He looked up, eyes searching mine, a mixture of relief and apprehension flickering across his features. He nodded slowly, setting the cup down like it was suddenly heavier than before. I took a breath and tried to gather the words that had tangled inside me for days. I heard you last night. I know about Lucas. The name tasted strange on my tongue, but it felt necessary. I didn't want to believe it, but I can't pretend anymore. David's shoulders sagged, a deep exhale escaping him. I never meant to hurt you, Ethan. I was scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of how you'd see me. It's not easy to admit, even to myself, but I love him. I love Lucas. His voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. And hiding it from you was my way of protecting us all. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, betrayal, confusion, but also something softer beneath the surface. Understanding. Why didn't you trust me? We've always been honest before. He rubbed the back of his neck, struggling for an explanation. Because it's complicated. I was figuring out who I was all over again, and I didn't want to lose my son in the process. The vulnerability in his voice broke through my defenses. I realized then that this wasn't just about secrecy or lies. It was about fear, identity, and the hope that love could survive even the hardest truths. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It hurts, Dad. I feel like everything I believed shifted overnight. But I also know you're still you, and I still love you. The words felt like a bridge between us, shaky but real. He stepped closer, hesitating for a moment before pulling me into a tight embrace. It was awkward, unsure. Two people learning to hold on to each other in a new way. But it was genuine. And that was what mattered. We talked for hours, peeling back layers of pain and fear, sharing memories and dreams that hadn't changed despite the shock. Dad told me about his struggles with identity, how he'd spent years denying parts of himself, and how meeting Lucas gave him hope for a future he never thought possible. I shared my own fears, my doubts about what family meant now, and how I wanted to understand, even if the path wasn't clear yet. It was the hardest conversation I'd ever had, but also the most necessary. Over time, we agreed to take things slow. No rushed answers, no forced forgiveness. Just honesty, patience, and the promise to rebuild trust one day at a time. That night, lying in bed, I realized that love isn't always simple or neat. Sometimes it's messy and painful, but that doesn't make it any less real. My family was changing, yes, but maybe, just maybe, it was growing stronger in ways I couldn't have imagined before. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I was ready to face it, awake, aware, and willing to accept the complexities of the people I loved most.